The Polish-Swedish Wars were a series of wars between the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and Sweden. Broadly construed, the term refers to a series of wars between 1563 and 1721. More narrowly, it refers to particular wars between 1600 and 1629. These are the wars included under the broader use of the term, the 16th-century conflict sometimes referred to as the Livonian War, the war against Sigismund in 1598, the War of 1600–29, which was twice interrupted by periods of truce and can be divided into the War of 1626–29, the conflicts in the second half of the 17th century known as the Deluge, the Great Northern War, the War of the Fourth Coalition, in which Poland, by then partitioned, was represented by the Polish legions in Napoleonic service. The last Polish-Swedish War was the War of the Sixth Coalition, because the Duchy of Warsaw was a Napoleonic ally, whereas the Kingdom of Sweden was a member of the anti-Napoleonic coalition. Livonian War, war against Sigismund. The conflict between Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and Sweden can trace its roots to the war against Sigismund, where Sigismund III Vasa, at one time king of both the Commonwealth and Sweden, lost the throne of Sweden during the Civil War. Few Commonwealth troops participated in this conflict, and it is mostly regarded as a Swedish civil war, not part of the Polish-Swedish Wars. After early stalemate, Sigismund was defeated in the Battle of Stang-Ebro in 1598, and by 1599, Sigismund was dethroned by his uncle, Duke Charles, and forced to retreat to the Commonwealth. This also spelled the end of the short-lived personal union between Poland and Sweden, Polish-Swedish War of 1600–11. However, even after being dethroned, Sigismund did not give up on regaining the Swedish throne, and from then on, most of his policies would revolve around his attempt to conquer Sweden. Even though Commonwealth nobility had little will for such a long and bloody conflict, Sigismund started his plan in 1599, when he confirmed the Pacta Conventa, documents with promises he signed when elected as a king of Poland, which stated that the then Swedish territory of Estonia would now become part of the Commonwealth. Polish nobility, the Szlachta, supported this particular conflict, assuming it would be limited to Estonia only, and expecting many gains in form of new lands and increases of grain export through access to Estonian ports on the Baltic Sea. In addition, Szlachta did not think highly of the Swedes, and did not expect this war to drag long or be difficult. They grossly underestimated their opponent, thinking that Poland, having been nearly undefeated in battle for over 100 years, would be easily able to parry any attacks of the Scandinavians. The Commonwealth had nearly 10 million inhabitants, almost 10 times that of 1 million in Sweden. On the other hand, Szlachta forgot that the Commonwealth had one of the smallest military-to-population ratios in Europe, and did not know that the Swedish army was highly trained and motivated. Sweden was able to draft a large army much more quickly than the Commonwealth, due to its centralized government and obligatory draft of free peasants. The Commonwealth was forced to fight on two fronts, as its armies were also needed south to deal with the Moldavian Magnate Wars, and Swedish forces quickly gained 3–1 numerical superiority. In the beginning of the war, in 1600, although a Commonwealth army under command of great Lithuanian hetman Krzysztof Mikołaj, the Thunderbolt Radziwiłł striking first, was able to deal the Swedish forces several defeats in the open fields, Swedes took control not only of Estonia, but of most of Livonia, the Commonwealth territory south of Estonia. The Polish-Lithuanian parliament, the Sejm, time, reacted by increasing funds for the army and recalling forces and commanders from the southern front to the threatened north. In 1601, Polish hetman Jan Karol Chodkowicz and Polish Chancellor Jan Zamoyski, recalled from Moldavia, arrived in Lithuania to fight the Swedish incursion, which now threatened not only the Estonia promised by Sigismund, but older Polish territories south of it. Chodkowicz and Radziwiłł defeated the Swedes in the first major open battle of this war at Kokenhusen in early 1601. Soon afterwards, Jan Zamoyski, fresh from his victory against the Moldavians, came in to help against the Swedes, with 12,000 men and 50 artillery pieces, 15 of which were classified as heavy. Charles was unable to deal effectively with such an army and was forced to retreat. However, during the retreat he left sizable numbers of defenders at various captured fortresses in Livonia. Zamoyski now took to siege warfare instead of chasing the retreating king, soon capturing Walmer and Fellin. By 1602, the Swedes were only left with control of Reval, Pernau, Habsal and Dorpat. However, Zamoyski, now 60 years old, had fallen ill and Chodkowicz took command and laid siege to Dorpat. At Wesenberg, he defeated a Swedish reinforcement force sent in to help Dorpat, which was soon forced to surrender. Chodkowicz was appointed acting commander-in-chief of Lithuania forces after Zamoyski's return south in 1602. Chodkowicz, despite inadequate supplies and little support from the Commonwealth Sejm and King Sigismund III Vasa, brilliantly distinguished himself capturing fortress after fortress and repulsing the Duke of Södermanland, afterwards Charles IX, from Riga. However, Reval, Pernau, and Narwa remained under Swedish control. In 1604 he captured Dorpat, twice defeated the Swedish generals at Bialekamin and near Weissenstein. For his valor Chodkowicz was rewarded by the king with the Grand Hetman Bulwer of Lithuania. However, the war was neglected by the Commonwealth's parliament, which turned a deaf ear to all his requests for reinforcements and for supplies and money to pay his soldiers. The Commonwealth's decentralized financial system meant that the Commonwealth treasury was almost always empty. This flaw plagued the Commonwealth for centuries. Chodkowicz nevertheless more than held his own against the Swedes. He instituted a new form of warfare based upon his use of the elite hussar cavalry, and consequently the Swedes were repeatedly defeated in the open field. First, the Commonwealth forces attacked Swedish cavalry, after which they usually attacked demoralized Swedish infantry which was unable to retreat at all, and usually annihilated whole formations of this infantry. In 1605 the Swedes spent large sums of money to conscript a massive new army. Rikdag spent much cash on conscripting new formations, and as the Russian Tsar Boris Godunov gave the Swedes much financial help, likely attempting to keep both Sweden and the Commonwealth busy during the time of troubles. The Swedes were able to hire large numbers of mercenaries, as well as hiring many siege engineers from all over Europe. In 1605, a few miles from Reval, a 5,000-strong army led by Anders Lenitsson landed in Estonia. Several days later another Swedish expedition, numbering around 4,000 and led by Count Frederick Wicke Mansfeld, landed near and besieged the fortress of Dunarmond near Riga, although without any success. After this setback, they now began laying siege to Riga. The main mission was to capture this important city, one of the largest Baltic ports. Chodkowicz moved in to relieve the garrison at Riga, but found that the Swedes were also sending in reinforcements under Lennartsson. Chodkowicz moved in on Lennartsson. However, he decided not to engage in open battle and retreated into a fortress. On finding out that Charles himself himself was now marching in with yet more reinforcements. Lennartson decided to link up with the king and assault Riga together. Chodkovich, who failed to prevent the Swedish forces from joining, moved from Ces to near Kirkemaneskil, where he built a small fortified camp. Charles, who arrived at Riga on the 23rd of September, learned of the Chodkovich force nearby and decided to destroy it with an attack with the majority of Swedish forces within the area. On the 27th of September, the Swedish force under King Charles moved towards Kirkeman. The Battle of Kirkeman on September 27, 1605, near Duna River would be Chodkovich's crowning achievement. Chodkovich, having smaller forces, used a feint to force the Swedes off the high position. The Swedes under Charles thought that the Lithuanians, with small support of Poles, were retreating and therefore they advanced, spreading out the formations to give chase. This is what Chodkovich was waiting for. The Commonwealth's army now gave fire with their infantry, causing the Swedes some losses, at which point the Hussars moved into a reformation and charged at the Swedish infantry formations. The Swedish formations broke completely, the king himself fleeing, barely escaping back to his flotilla off the coast. Thus Chodkovich, with barely 3,600 troops, defeated an 11,000-man Swedish army, inflicting 5,500 minus 9,000 casualties, for which feat he received letters of congratulation from the Pope, all the Catholic potentates of Europe, and even from the Sultan of Turkey and the Shah of Persia. Yet this great victory was absolutely fruitless, owing to the domestic dissensions which prevailed in the Commonwealth during the following 5 years. Chodkovich's army, unpaid for years, abandoned him at last en masse in order to plunder the estates of the political opponents, leaving the hetman to carry on the war as best he could with a handful of mercenaries paid out of the pockets of himself and his friends. With tiny, inadequate forces, Chodkovich nonetheless prevented Swedes from overrunning the entire Unflanti region, helped by the relative inaction of Swedish commanders until 1608. Chodkovich, who was one of the magnates who remained loyal to the king, had to divide his attention between the rebellion against Sigismund in the Commonwealth and a fresh invasion of Livonia by the Swedes led by Mansfeld in 1608. Mansfeld captured Dunarmond, Thelen, and Kokenhusen, but when Chodkovich returned, the tide turned. In 1609 Chodkovich once more he relieved Riga besides capturing Pernau. Chodkovich also defeated the Swedish flotilla at Salis and finally defeated Mansfeld's army once again near the river Gauja. Eventually, a truce was signed in 1611 after the death of Charles IX. It would last until 1617. During the next decade, the Commonwealth was occupied with its aggression against Russia. Southern borders were also endangered by the constant troubles with Ottoman Empire during the Magnate Wars in Moldavia. Polish-Swedish War of 1620–25. Having signed the Treaty of Stolbovo ending their Ingran War with Russia in 1617, the Swedes, led by King Gustav II Adolf, who was hailed as savior of Protestant Europe, turned their attention to the Commonwealth again. They have expanded the gains in the disputed Livonia region, taking Dunarmond and Pernau in 1617. When the truce expired in November 1620, Gustav Adolf succeeded in taking the city of Riga after a few weeks of siege. The Commonwealth, occupied by a serious war with the Ottomans, was unable to send significant forces to stop Gustav Adolf, and was forced to sign a truce favorable to Gustav Adolf. The Commonwealth was forced to cede Livonia north of Dvina River and retained only a nominal control over Riga. A new truce in Mitau was signed and lasted from November 1622 to March 1625. Polish-Swedish War of 1626–29. In 1625 the Swedes quickly occupied all of Livonia and Courland by the year's end. In the beginning of 1626, a Swedish army under Gustavus II Adolphus numbering 3,000 men, faced a Polish force twice as big at Wallhof under Jan Stanislaus Sapieha. Swedish casualties were reported as none, whilst Polish casualties exceeded 2,000 men. In May 1626 Gustav Adolf began the surprising invasion of Prussia. Gustav's landing in Ducal Prussia near Pillau with over 8,000 soldiers came as a surprise to the Commonwealth, and despite his relatively small forces, Gustav Adolf, acting with the support of the Elector of Brandenburg, quickly captured all of the coastal towns, with the exception of the largest prize, the city of Gdansk. The Commonwealth received no support from its vassal, Ducal Prussia. Near the village of Niewina battle, Gustav defeated a Polish army led by King Sigismund. Sigismund retreated and called for reinforcements from other parts of the country. Hetman Stanislaw Konispolski's forces moved to Prussia with amazing speed. Strengthened by other units, he had 10,000 men against over 20,000 strong Swedish force, using the tactic of maneuver warfare, with small mobile units striking at the enemy's communication lines and smaller units. He managed to stop the Swedish attack and force the units under Axel Oxenstierna, who also attempted to avoid battles with an overwhelming concentrated forces of Konispolski, into a defense. For a short time the war became a stalemate. In the meantime, the Sejm agreed to raise money for the war, but the situation of the Polish forces was difficult. Lithuanian forces were dealt a serious defeat in December 1626 near Kokenhusen in Livonia and retreated behind the Divina River. The Swedes planned to strike Konispolski from two directions, Oxenstierna from direction of the Vistula and Johann Strafe von Lauenstein and Maximilian Teuffel from Swedish-held Pomerania. The flooding of the Vistula disrupted the plans and allowed Konispolski to intercept the enemy units coming from Pomerania. Konispolski recaptured the town of Puck on the 2nd of April. During the crossing of the Vistula near Kiersmark, in the vicinity of Danzig, Gustav met the Polish forces and in the ensuing battle was wounded in the hip and forced to retreat. In July he led forces to lift the siege of Braniew and lay siege to Ornetta. Konispolski responded with the sudden attack and capture of Niew. Gustav Adolf was reported to be impressed by the speed of Konispolski's reaction. With about 7,800 men, Konispolski tried to stop the Swedish army from reaching Danzig near Dierschow. On 7–8 August, battle with the Swedish forces took place near the swamps of Moltawa. The Swedes wanted to provoke the Poles into an attack and then destroy them with infantry fire and artillery, but Konispolski decided not to attack. The Swedes then took the initiative and attacked with cavalry, but did not manage to draw the Poles within the range of the fire. The consequent Swedish attacks managed to deal severe damage to Polish cavalry units, but did not manage to cripple the army. The battle ended when Gustav Adolf was once again wounded and the Swedes retreated. After the battle, Konispolski saw the need to reform the army and strengthen the firepower of infantry and artillery to match the Swedish units. The Swedes, on the other hand, learned arts of cavalry attacks, charges and melee combat from the Poles. In March–April of 1627 near Zahn, Konispolski forced the Swedish forces to retreat inside the city and 3 days later to surrender, leaving behind the banners and insignia. Some Swedish soldiers and mercenaries changed sides at the time. This victory also convinced the Elector of Brandenburg to declare his support for the Commonwealth, and the Lithuanian forces resumed the offensive in Inflanty. Konispolski's insistence of taking the war to the seas resulted in the tiny and untested Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth navy of 9 ships to the defeat of a Swedish flotilla on 28 November 1627, at the Battle of Allura. In 1628 the Polish forces, lacking funding, were forced to stop their offensive and switch to defense. Gustav Adolf captured Noe and Brodnica. Konispolski counterattacked by using his small forces most efficiently. Fast cavalry melee attacks combined with the supporting fire of infantry and artillery, and using fortifications and terrain advantage. By that time the war had become a war of maneuver, with neither side willing to face the other without advantages of terrain or fortifications. The Sejm decided to increase the funds for the war after the Battle of Górno, where Stanislaw Potocki was defeated. The Catholic Austrian sent help to the Commonwealth in the form of units under Field Marshal Jan Jerzy Arnheim. A corps under Albrecht von Wallenstein also cooperated in Pomerania with Konispolski in 1629. Nonetheless, Konispolski was forced to withdraw Commonwealth forces from many strategic Polish strongholds in Prussia. In time, Hetman Konispolski managed to recapture Puck. The final battle took place on 27 June 1629 near Trzciana. The Swedes attacked in the direction of Gradens, were stopped, and retreated to Sturm and Marienburg. Konispolski attacked the rear guard led by Jan Count of Wren, and destroyed it. He also repelled a counterattack by Swedish raiders, who were pushed in the direction of Pulkovice, where another counterattack was led by Gustav Adolf with 2,000 cavalrymen. This counterattack was also stopped, and the Swedish forces were saved by the last reserve units led by Field Marshal Hermann Wrangel, who finally managed to stop the Polish attack. Swedish losses were heavy, especially in the cavalry regiments. Gustav Adolf said after the battle, "I have never been in such a bar." 600 Swedes were killed, including the Count of Wren and the son of Wrangel, Jan Wilhelm Rhingraf, and 200 were captured. Polish losses were under 200 killed and injured. However, this victory was not followed up politically and militarily. Despite all of Konispolski's brilliant efforts, a ceasefire in Staratarg on 26 October 1629 was in favor of the Swedes, to whom Poland ceded the larger part of Livonia with the important port of Riga. Swedes also got the right to tax Polish trade moved through the Baltic, kept control of many cities in Royal Prussia, Memel and Elblag, and for the time were generally recognized as the dominant power on the southern Baltic seacoast. Duchy of Prussia was compensated by its losses by Commonwealth, with the temporary transfer of Malbork, Szedtum and Ulawi-Wislan. Remaining ships of the Commonwealth fleet were transferred to Sweden. The Swedes' only failure was their inability to capture the important port of Gdansk. Gustav Adolf's biographer, Hart, noted that the king was furious that a Pacific commercial rabble should beat a set of illustrious fellows, who made fighting the profession. Nonetheless, Swedes now controlled almost all Baltic ports, with the exception of Danzig, Puck, Königsberg and Liepaja. This would be the closest Sweden ever got to realizing its goal of making the Baltic Sea Sweden's inner lake. After the treaty, Sweden used the prizes and money as a starting point in their entry into the 30 Years' War and began the invasion of northern Germany. Treaty of Altmark would be revised in Commonwealth favor in 1635, when Sweden, weakened by the losses in the 30 Years' War, would retreat from some Baltic ports and stop taking the 3.5% tax. The Deluge, the Northern Wars. The Great Northern War, War of the Fourth Coalition, War of the Sixth Coalition.